Thanks, Chelsea.
You're welcome. I don't see anyone in the waiting room yet.
That's okay. Don't worry about it. Go ahead, do your thing.
Okay.
I got this handled. Basketball team doing? Yeah, and that's a good day. Actually. Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Hey Mike, how's it going?
Going great. How are you doing?
Freezing cold. I'm ready to go to Hawaii.
There you go. Are you ready for the next storm coming in tonight?
No,
Okay.
I live in town, so I'm not super worried, but
Good.
I know others aren't, so stay safe, y'all.
My biggest concern when it rains hard, my Christmas ornaments on the lawn short out on me. They must be getting into some plug water or something. So I'm half dark with a big rainstorm.
So I got one for you. I have king palms in my front yard,
Okay.
and PG&E made me move one of them. So I replanted it. I had my friend come over. We picked it up with their giant truck that they have, replanted it. Well, the palm tree is right outside of my room. So every time I hear that wind going and those palm leaves swaying back and forth, I'm going, is this the day where it comes crashing through the house?
Oh, geez. Yeah, well, hope not.
Me too.
Hope not. All right, well, I got 102. So let's get started. So anybody have any questions before we get started on part two? Anything from yesterday? Anything you guys discovered with the contract? Okay, I have a feeling that I'm doing this omitting people and I'm not looking at the chat at all. So the chat is going to be unattended today. So let's just ask the questions and at the end of each page, and we'll go on from there. Okay.
Mike, I have one question.
Sure.
If you can explain again L2,
Okay.
the bottom line where the price was, is that applicable only when we have an appraisal contingency, or is that applicable any which way?
Okay. So let's get to it right now. So everyone can see the screen. Can we see the screen? Okay.
Yes.
Good, okay,
Yes.
all right, so L2, the appraisal contingency. And we talked about it, and we'll be talking about it in a few minutes, which refers to paragraph 8, and that's where I think we'll start off at 7 today. The appraisal contingency is the same thing as what we had with the old contract. It's a standalone appraisal. So you could have a loan contingency and you have an appraisal contingency. You could remove one and keep the other one. They're all independent of each other. So if a home that your buyer's purchasing, it does not appraise, the loan contingency does not protect you in that regard. It's only if you have an appraisal contingency. So what was the exact question that you had regarding that?
How does the value, like, the bottom line where the dollar mark is, and we were discussing the purchase price, or like, how much the buyer will cover in case it doesn't
Okay.
appraise?
Okay,
Does that come into play if we have appraisal contingency, or if we don't have it? So I need some more explanation on that.
only if you have an appraisal contingency,
Okay.
the dollar amount, that it has to appraise. If you have an appraisal contingency, it's the appraisal contingency at the purchase price, or now you have this option of a minimum appraisal price. And the benefit of using that is that if your buyer's comfortable that it doesn't have to appraise at purchase price, but it has to appraise at a certain price, because they're willing to make up the difference of more money that they have to make up the difference should it not appraise. It is in a stronger negotiating position if everyone has an appraisal contingency and your buyer has an appraisal contingency at a lower price, that should put you at more of an advantage over the rest of the competition that has appraisal contingencies at the purchase price. So that's the only benefit. If there's no appraisal contingency and you check this box, you please do not have, I'm hoping that the technology doesn't allow you to check the box and put a number in because it's a moot point. If there's no appraisal contingency, it doesn't apply. This minimum purchase price or minimum appraisal value. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Good. Okay, good. All right, so let's get started. And we left off, if someone can confirm with me that we left off on paragraph 7.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's get started on paragraph 7. So the first thing is that as we talked about yesterday, there's the occupancy. Either it's going to be a primary residence, secondary residence, or a investment property. And the person that, or the entity that cares most about that is not the seller, but it's the lender. And the reason that is important to a lender is that each of those occupancies carry a weighted risk. If I have 2 homes and I can only afford 1 mortgage payment, I'm probably going to make the mortgage payment of my primary residence and not default on that. And my secondary home is probably going to go, or my investment property is going to go. So it's just all about the risk, and the interest rates are tied to the risk on that. Paragraph B talks about the condition of the property at closing. This is the old paragraph 11 and paragraph 9. And it says that the property is going to be as is, just like the old contract, and that the seller needs to maintain the property in its present condition at the time the property was entered into contract. So if the property had a beautiful sparkling blue pool, the water was sparkling clear, and at close of escrow it's a musky, muddy water that's green and moldy and everything else, it's required that the seller put it back in the condition that it was when it was that sparkling clean at the time the contract was ratified. Same thing with interior of the house, same thing with everything about it. It needs to be in the same condition. The important thing on this this contract that is different from the old contract is how they treat the seller's property when the seller vacates the property. They really cleaned it up and made it a lot better for the buyer with this contract. Midway through the contract, you could see it talks about if items are not removed when the possession is delivered to the buyer, all items shall be deemed abandoned. Okay. Currently, the laws say that if a property if there's property that's left, personal property left on the in the house, if it's over a certain amount of dollars, it's required that the buyer store the property for so many days and then have, give more rights to the occupant to handle the property. This basically, by saying that it's abandoned, it's a lot easier to get rid of the property. So the first thing is that the buyer has to give the seller written notice to remove the items within 3 days, and then after 3 days can have them removed or disposed of. And not only dispose of it, but also could bring, small claims action to get the cost of removal paid for by the seller. So that's a big change, which sometimes, before created a problem for the buyer and really undue burden on them. It's much more buyer friendly. Paragraph 2 talks about, just like the old contract, buyers should conduct investigations and determine the condition of the property and not rely on anything, but keep your head out of the sand and pay attention and don't rely on anybody else, but do your own investigations on the property. So this shows up about 4 or 5 times in the contract. Paragraph C talks about the seller remaining in possession after the close of escrow. This is a lot more kind of cover your butts on this and a lot of stuff in here covering CYA for really the agents. We want to make sure that if the seller is going to remain in the property, that the buyer consults with his insurance agent, make sure that there's insurance on this, make sure that the buyer's covered because it's his house now, and probably has a loan on it, and needs to make sure that the insurance is covered, number one, and then also the responsibility if something happens that dealing with a seller and the buyer on this. Paragraph D is the same, that the anything that was under warranty or implied warranty is going to be passed on to the buyer, but no one knows really if those warranties are transferable or not, but you got them anyway, buyer, and we're going to give you everything. We're going to also provide keys to the buyer of every lock, passwords, garage door openers, all the stuff that was in the past contract, and is spelled out even more in this contract about what is going to be passed on. That's about it. So, the extra thing that's in here, which always created a problem in the past, not always, once in a while, when we had a close of escrow, the old contract said that the buyers to provided the keys, and just like it says here, but they added a few words in this paragraph, in paragraph E, which it says, seller shall on close of escrow, and even if seller remains in possession. So that's been added. Even if seller remains in possession. The big argument used to be that the buyer says, hey, I want the keys. And the seller would say, hey, I'm still living here. You're not getting them. So this, even though it was implied that the seller had to give the new owner the keys, much like a landlord tenant situation, now it's really in black and white on that. And let's see what else. I think that covers the that in for possession. Contingencies and removal of contingencies.
Hey, Mike, I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
So on the SIP form,
Yep.
if that box is checked saying once possession ends, does that override this paragraph?
The SIP form about the keys.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful.
That would oversee that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Contingencies and removal of contingencies. First of all, it says, just like, no change here. The buyer has to act in good faith. This paragraph 2 is new, where it spells out the buyer is advised to investigate the insurability of the property as early as possible. And this may be a requirement for the lending. I always am concerned with these removal of contingencies or no contingencies on with the purchase agreement without somebody investigating whether you can get fire insurance or not. If you remove your contingencies and you haven't investigated whether you can get fire insurance, you could be in a buyer could be in a little bit of a hot water because they're in breach of contract. They don't have if they can't get insurance, they have to use the investigation contingency as a basis for protecting them regarding the insurability of the home. So now we have in paragraph 8.2 a little bit more expansion on buyers and fire insurance on this. The other thing, what I like about paragraph 8 is that all this that's in here, which is kind of was in the old contract, was spread out throughout the whole contract. This really is condensed, putting everything in one spot regarding contingencies and removal of contingencies. So I kind of think they did a good job in formulating this new contract with that. So that's pretty much it. So we got contingencies. It talks about in paragraph 5, no loan contingency. And it says, hey, if there's no loan contingency, they're obtaining a loan, there's no outs on the part of the buyer, no protection regarding if you can't get if you can get the loan and as a result of something else, you don't buy the house, you can't use the loan contingency, basically appraisal. So you can't use problems with the appraisal as your protection for the loan contingency on this. Appraisal, separate paragraph regarding appraisal contingency. They talked about let's see what else we here. Loan, appraisal. Oh, here's the new part right here. What I love about this is expanded in this is that regarding the appraisal, and it says let's just read it in paragraph 1, which is the new part here. This agreement is contingent upon written appraisal, no less than the amount specified in the grid. Appraisals are often a reliable source to verify square footage of the subject property. However, the ability to cancel based on the measurements provided in the appraisal falls within the investigation of the property contingency. The appraisal contingency is solely limited to the value determined. Here's where this had to be put in. We had an appraisal contingency. So the what's being listed on the MLS is 2,000 square feet. The appraiser measures it at 1,500 square feet, but still appraises the value at $2 million. And buyers were trying to get out of the deal because of the appraisal, not so much of not appraising, because it did, but because the square footage is different. So first of all, to get out of that problem as a seller or listing agent, you use our square foot advisory, where it's filled in and you fill it in and get the buyer to sign that. But it's also saying that just because the square footage is different, it doesn't give an out to the buyer for the appraisal contingency if it appraises at the price that you wanted to appraise at per the contract. So that's a little bit of a difference there. And I think it's a change for the good. No appraisal contingency, that's really the same. Not use the loan contingency. Basically, it says again, you can't use the loan contingency for appraisal values, can't use the appraisal contingency for loan issues. Paragraph C, investigation of the property. That's nothing there except, what I like about this is they added, let's see. Contingent upon the buyer's acceptance of the condition of the property and any other matters affecting the property. That any other matters affecting the property is just an added words that are in there. So basically, paragraph C is the investigation of the entire property, where you're dealing with Megan's law, you're dealing with the insurability, you're dealing with the condition of the home. Everything is the catch-all that we previously used in paragraph 14 contingency.
Hey, Mike, I had a question about the appraisals in the chart that you were talking about earlier.
Okay.
You know, you had mentioned that you were hoping they'd set something up where you couldn't check the no appraisal contingency, and then also like you could only do one or the other between putting the amount or checking no appraisal contingency. It does.
Okay, so this amount here,
Yeah. So I was curious. Yeah, those two boxes.
yep.
If for some reason somebody did do both, does one of them take precedence over the other?
I'm hoping, Andy, that our technology for zip forms doesn't allow those two boxes to be checked at the same time.
Right. Okay.
If at the worst, if it does, we're defeating the purpose of a clear and concise agreement to work off of. So
Yeah.
I would say this, to answer your question specifically, if no appraisal contingency is checked, and you have a CR attached, and it says it on the contingency being waived there, then that CR takes over any contingencies that are marked with contingencies in the contract. So
Okay.
to answer your question specifically, if there's a contingency removal form and appraisal is checked, it doesn't matter what you have written up in the under the contingencies of a checkbox and the dollar amount.
Okay, because the form would take precedence.
The CR form takes precedence. I could have a contingency, I could have 8 contingencies in here in the purchase agreement.
Right.
And if I have a contingency removal form and all contingencies are waived, that takes precedent.
Okay. And then I had another question about the appraisal. Say you wrote $1 million for the appraisal and the appraisal came in at 980. Is it at that point at the discretion of the buyer to remove that contingency if they still wanted to pursue the property?
Absolutely. What the appraisal contingency does is protects the buyers so that they have a choice. They're now bound to the contract and having to perform if it appraises below the sales price.
Okay.
So it's up to the buyer if they still, and to be honest with you, every day it's a lot of times it's still happening where the buyer goes ahead and makes up the difference. But the problem comes in, Andy, when a buyer goes in without the appraisal contingency and doesn't have the money to make up the difference, and then is screwed. So that scenario, $1 million sale, and it comes in at 980, and you don't have any contingencies for the appraisal, if you don't come up with that $20,000 difference and perform, you're in breach of contract and you risk losing your deposit. Okay, let's go back to where we were, which is, I think, on paragraph 8. We did the appraisal contingency and investigation of properties, and paragraph D is the disclosures from the seller. And again, same thing, that the seller has to abide by the terms that they have to get the disclosures to the buyer within a certain time frame in paragraph 3, and then the buyer in the grid, paragraph 3 has paragraph 3L has so many days, and that's going to be, how many days does the buyer have to remove contingencies? No matter what the contingencies are? What's the default?
17.
17 on all these contingencies. Okay. Let's talk about title. Okay. Actually, I just realized something. I have a paper form of the RPA, and the one I'm sharing on the screen, there are two different ones. One's an updated one. I think the one on the screen is the updated one. Anyway. Okay, so the new verbiage on the title, and this title contingency is contingent upon buyer's ability to obtain the title policy provided for in paragraph 13G. So again, a built-in contingency, and it says that there is a contingency for the buyer to get the title insurance on here. Everything else, the verbiage is the same on here, and it's real important when we represent a buyer. The process usually takes place where the seller already has the disclosures, and they're online, they're posted before you make up the offer. You review the seller disclosures, you review the preliminary title report that the seller's agent opened up escrow, or usually, even in Santa Cruz, there's a prelim that's already opened. So you get to see the liens and what's out there. And more, it's becoming the norm. However, as good as the attentions and the intentions of everyone to get that preliminary title report, the one that really is the most important for the buyers is the one that comes a day or two after the acceptance, which is the new preliminary title report. A lot of times it matches what was posted, but there could be a chance that it's different. And that's the one that you need to review. That's the one that is the important one. That's the one that needs to be posted in our transaction file, because that's the one that is going to be insured. And although it usually doesn't change, you just can't ignore that email that you get with a new preliminary title report with your client's names on it. You need to review it and review it with your buyer. Paragraph F is the HOA package. And second. And paragraph G, we talked about yesterday, is anything that's leased or liened. Usually the big item there is the solar. And just remember that when you are showing a property and there's a solar panels on the roof, there should be a little light going above your head saying you need to check to make sure that the solar is owned and not leased. If it is leased, then the buyer's going to usually has to assume that lease. Very rarely does a seller want to pay off a lease on that, and that the buyer is going to be having to take on that responsibility. And that number, whatever the monthly lease is, needs to be discussed with your lender to make sure that that extra money per month doesn't change the ability of affording the loan, because it is it could be $100 a month, but that could be the difference of ratios that might put the buyer over the edge. So all that needs to be looked at when you're showing a home with solar, to make sure if there is a lease, you need to get into another action of uncovering what that lease is all about. Paragraph H talks about the removal of the contingencies with the offer, and that's that CR form, contingency removal. And nothing's really changed there. I don't see any new verbiage on that. But it is more of a CYA, and it is telling the buyer that this last line here in paragraph H, if buyer removes or waives any contingencies without an adequate understanding of the property condition or buyer's ability to purchase, buyer is acting against the advice of the agent. So it's in big, bold wording that now I'm hoping that the agents talk to the buyers and make sure before they're waiving contingencies that they do understand what they're actually doing. Okay. It also says that if a buyer does remove the contingencies and doesn't have all the information from the seller, buyer, get your head out of the sand, because you are removing contingencies. Buyers relinquishing any contractual rights that apply to that contingency. Okay. Let's see what else. Okay. That covers the contingencies on this. Basically, there's a whole bunch of disclosures in here about buyer, before you remove contingencies, think about it. Okay. Items included in and excluded from the sale. This talks about that big chart with boxes about checking all the boxes that are included and the items that are not included. So bottom line is not really a new paragraphs, just better written on here. They expand a little bit on here regarding did they expand on here? Paragraph 2 talks a little bit more about what's included, what's existing. Built-in appliances or appliances for which special openings or encasements have been made would be included. So they've expanded on this. The pool, spa, more information on here, pool covers, pool nets. That's all added. Basically read the contract here, paragraph B2, and this is what is included in what's going on. My favorite is one of the things they added. I didn't know really the difference, but light bulbs and including smart bulbs right here. Anyway, that's added too. So I guess there was a bunch of sellers that took their smart bulbs with them. I don't know. That's kind of it. Oh, no, this is new here. If seller does not intend to include any items specified as being included above because it is not owned by seller, whether placed on the property or by the agent, a stager, or third party, the item should be listed as being excluded. I'll give you an example. I sold a property and the stager put a window valance across the window. And the contract calls for any window covering should be included in the property, but it was the stager. So I needed to make sure that the window valance was not included, and that it was able to be given back to the stager. So that would be an easy example of what this paragraph is talking about. Um, let's see what else. No, everything else in here is just the same. It talks more about home automation, different high-tech stuff that goes with the property, non-dedicated devices.
Q-tips डब्बा बाहर इतना है.
Yep.
दिख नहीं रहा.
Non-dedicated devices. This would be, I guess, iPads and stuff like that would be all smart home and security system control are included. Buyer acknowledges that separate device and access to Wi-Fi and internet may be required to operate some smart home features, and buyer may have to obtain some something after close of escrow. If I'm operating through my iPad, my heating system, I'm gonna keep my iPad as a seller, and that the buyer's gonna have to get their own iPad to do that. Anyway, it's pretty easy just going through it, what they're talking about. Let's see what else. 7. I think that's it for paragraph 9. Let's talk about paragraph C. Items excluded from the sale. A little bit different here compared to the old contract. If you read this here, it talks about the TV. So the TV goes with the seller, and that's excluded. But the bracket or the mechanism attached to the component of the item of the property. So audio and video not attached would be excluded. Furniture that's secured to the wall for like earthquakes would be excluded. Equipment is excluded, even if it's attached by a bracket. Even audio equipment would be excluded unless it is like those built-in speakers that are flush mounted to the ceiling, that would be left with the property. But if there's a speaker that is attached to the wall by a bracket, that is not included. So that would be excluded on that. And you could read the items excluded from the sale. So basically a little bit different from what we had in the past. And again, it talks about brackets attached to the walls, floors, or ceilings for any of the components, furniture, items will be removed, and the holes or other damage shall be repaired, not painted. Same thing as the old contract, not painted. There was a lot of disputes that would arise because it wouldn't match exactly the same. And so to eliminate any problem, the seller is not obligated to paint, but he's obligated to repair the holes. And that takes care of that one. Any questions on the last page? Any questions about property that is included or excluded? Anything we covered? Okay. All right, let's get on to paragraph 10. Allocation of costs. This is expanded compared to the old contract. And the reason why it's expanded is because of point of sale. And point of sales, it's not a state mandate. It's not the state requiring point of sales. It's the local jurisdictions are recovering, are are requiring point of sales. And when I mean local, Santa Cruz County might require something that Santa Clara County does not, and vice versa. And all through, so even there's cities that require point of sales that the county does not do. So the first thing that you need to be sure of is if you're selling property in an area that you're not familiar with, you got to get familiar with what the local jurisdiction's requirements are. It's important that you know where you're working, number one. So that's the issue there for all this in this paragraph, allocation of costs, and paragraph B, government requirements. That's one issue, and it talks about the point of sale. It also talks about if there's reinspection fees, it's now a seller cost. Spells it out there. And the other thing in the home warranty, this is new. Buyers shall choose the coverages regardless of any optional coverages indicated in the home warranty. Remember, we talked about yesterday in the grid, the home warranty had a dollar amount figure, not a option coverages. So anyway, so that's a little bit different than what the old one is. I think it's cleaner. I think it's better. Paragraph 11 is statutory and other disclosures. It's the old paragraph 10, and pretty much everything is the same. They did add on the fire hardening and defense on there. So this covers basically, TDS, natural hazard disclosure statement, SPQ, fire hardening, along those lines. Let's talk about the TDS. And the TDS, like the old contract, is a requirement. And if there are some exclusions to the TDS, whether it's a probate, things like that, and you would use what's called the my mind just drew a blank. The exempt form, which is a one-page document. So anyway, so the TDS requires that any material fact that the seller knows has to be disclosed to the buyer, and any subsequent material fact that the seller discovers has to be, if the TDS is already given out, has to be a new TDS or a modified TDS or an addendum to TDS. And the strong thing about the TDS is that it gives a buyer normally 5 days, because from the time that they get the TDS, 5 days is from mailing, 3 days from hand delivering. So they consider email mailing. So the 3 days that you've been referring to for years with emails now is 5 days. And let's face it, most of our the way of delivery is electronic delivery, and that is basically 5 days. So let's start thinking more about the buyer with 5 days than with 3 days on this. But nevertheless, no matter what the days are, the buyer, once they get a transfer disclosure statement, has the right to cancel the contract and doesn't need a reason to cancel the contract and get their full deposit back. That's the benefit of the transfer disclosure statement or a supplemental transfer disclosure statement. So it's real important from a seller's perspective that the transfer disclosure statement is given to the buyer as soon as possible. And sooner the better to eliminate the ability for the buyer to back out of the transaction. So an example would be seller gives a buyer TDS day before close of escrow. The seller discovers that there was a murder that took place on his front porch. And is that a material fact? Absolutely. Does the seller have to notify the buyer of this material fact? Absolutely. Seller does it by either a new TDS or a supplemental TDS, regardless of whatever way it is. It's new information. It's like a new TDS, and the buyer has the right to cancel the contract and get their entire deposit, even if they've removed all their contingencies based on the new TDS. Now, there's an exclusion not having to do a new TDS, and it's written here in bold. And a new TDS or amended TDS or disclosure is not required for something that the buyer finds. So if the seller doesn't know about it, but the buyer finds out, he should be using it under his investigations as the right to back out of the transaction, not something that he discovers himself. So when he removes his contingencies and then he does a foundation inspection and finds some damage to the foundation, the seller is not required to give a new TDS on that because it was something that the buyer discovered, not the seller. So it's really to this exclusion to a new TDS is really to protect the integrity of contingency removals. If there wasn't that exclusion to the new TDS, me as a buyer, I can find a whole bunch of things that's probably wrong with the property that could be picayune, but I can hire someone to go underneath the house and look for a slight foundation crack, just normal cracks that are in every house. And since it's new information, I would hope I'd be able to tell the seller, hey, I got this new information, therefore give me a new TDS or supplemental TDS, and then I want to back away from it. So it does not allow that type of thing. And the question that gets asked is, well, if the buyer finds something that's new, he should have the right to get it, to be able to get out of the transaction. And my response is that buyer should have found something new during his investigation time. So anyway, any questions on paragraph 7, on page 7, TDS especially? Nope. Okay. Let's talk about, so we got the TDS. The other mandatory disclosure is lead-based paint. And nothing really is new for lead-based paint. The buyer has the right to conduct an investigation, and you need a lead-based paint disclosure on any property that's built prior to 78. And to be honest with you, I like it on every single property just to get a lead-based paint in the file and signed by all parties. Home fire hardening disclosure and advisory. This is a lot more, and I'll lump in the defensible space disclosure and addendum. This is pretty complicated stuff, and we're still going through the process of it. Probably needs a separate class to talk about it. But if a property that's for sale and fits under a transfer disclosure statement, so anything not needing a transfer disclosure statement doesn't need these addendums and advisories. But if it does have it, if a TDS is required, then if it is in a high or very high hazard severity zone, then you need the disclosure and addendum, defensible space, and the disclosure and advisory for the home fire hardening. That needs to be done. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today. And we'll have to do a kind of a more in-depth on this disclosure and go through it. Waiver is the same. You can't waive the lead as well as the mandated disclosures. F is return of the signed copies. Let's talk about termination rights. Okay. Same thing here. We talked about the TDS. We talked about the 5 days. 3 days by given personally, 5 days by mail, and email counts as 5 days. Defensible compliance. Buyer's going to agree to do the defensible space compliance if it's not done already by the seller. Buyer can refuse, and the seller can give a notice to perform to comply. The buyer to comply, and if buyer doesn't comply, then we could have a cancellation on this. But I promise we'll do it. We'll do a defensible space compliance class next month. Withholding taxes, basically that's the FERPTA, and we agree that the escrow company will get the FERPTA from the seller. We don't need the FERPTA as long as the escrow company gives us an affidavit that the seller has filled out a FERPTA, and they'll take care of it with the escrow company, and we don't have to have the burden of a FERPTA with the social security numbers of someone else, so that we don't have to worry about that. So it's really, the burden is really to get the taxes from the seller on their gain, and whether they're a U.S. tax-paying citizen or not, we want to comply with the laws that there be an affidavit signed by the seller, and we'll put the responsibility that the escrow company will take care of that and give us what's called an affidavit that they have that. Megan's Law database, telling the buyer that there's a venue that they can look to make sure that if they are concerned about sexual predators in the area, they can go on a website and investigate. Are we required to go on the database disclosure and go on the website and see? No, I really don't want you to do that. But what I do want you to do is give point the buyer in the right direction, and if they want to go on, they have the ability to go on. Paragraph J is the liquid transmission pipelines. That's the gas. San Bruno, where there's high transmission lines going through a neighborhood. What we have is our natural hazard disclosure company will alert us and let us know if we're in I think it's is it a quarter mile, half a mile? I can't remember. But if it's within an area, it will tell us. It won't point out exactly where the gas line is, because for security reasons and the threat of terrorist activity, but it will say within so many feet of a gas line. So that's a disclosure that's on there as well.
Can I ask
Um,
a question right here?
Yeah,
About these pipelines and liquid transmissions, isn't this the job for geodisclosure, natural hazardous material disclosure? This is the part of that, right? Related paragraph with that.
yeah, it'll be on your, you know, JCP, property ID, whatever company you use. They will identify whether it's in that geographic area of a gas transmission pipeline.
So when I order a GCP or geodisclosure or whatever company it is, it will be taking off my shoulders from liability, right?
That's
With
correct.
this paragraph. Okay.
Yep, yep. The important thing is you need to go over this with the buyer and alert them as to what things to be concerned about, and also especially if it's in that that report of within so many feet on that, just alert them and go over it. But these are things that should be under consideration when a buyer is buying a property. Again, the important thing is that we alert them to this and let them know where the answers are. Megan's Law, we covered, condominium and PUD. These are the first letting the buyer know that it's part of a PUD or planned development, PD, and also condominium. Then there's going to be those HOA documents, and the buyer should go over them because when they buy the condominium, they're also buying the HOA. And if the finances are in really bad shape, that might have some way into whether the value of the condo. And this is a complete package, and it spells it out what should be included in this HOA package. And one of the best ways to get information, in my opinion, is to review the minutes of the meetings, and everything comes out in those meetings. So depending on the size of the HOA, some will have, the last 12 months, they'll have monthly meetings. Some will only meet once a year. So it really depends on the size of the condominium or planned development. But it's something that the buyer should review and feel comfortable in purchasing the property. Natural hazard and environmental hazards. We talked about this a couple minutes ago. It'll talk about whether it's in a fire zone, whether it's in an earthquake zone, whether it's in a flood zone, and all the things associated with paragraph L. And it's a really inexpensive disclosure on a part of the seller to give to the buyer. It relieves a lot of the duties of what the seller needs to disclose, and for $120, $130, it takes the burden off the seller and gives a more accurate information than the seller can give. Any questions on this page? Okay. This also, paragraph M, talks about when we talk about the TDS of disclosing all known material facts. This defines it a little bit too. Known material facts could also include insurance claims within the past 5 years, as well as anything that would be a material facts, anything that would be detrimental for a buyer to move into the property. They ought to know about it. And what are material facts? It's not just the condition of the home. It could be about the neighborhood. It could be about the the meth dealer that's right next door. It could be the robberies in the neighborhood. It could be the high-speed rail line that's right adjacent to the backyard. So all these things would be something that would be important for a buyer to know, and a material fact of could be adversely affecting their living and quiet enjoyment in their house. So, okay, paragraph 12. Buyer's investigation of the property. Everything that we covered where the sellers required, it used to be the old paragraph 10, but now it's paragraph 11 as far as disclosures are. Now in paragraph 12, the buyer should be investigating. And what could those those things be? Inspections regarding any physical attributes of the property or items connected to the property, such as A, B, C, D, all these things. So one of them is the physical condition of the property, but that's not everything. There's more than that involved. All other buyer investigations, such as insurance, other things like that would be included as the investigations. Review of reports in paragraph 3 would be things that the buyer should investigate. Let's talk on the old contract. The buyer can do any inspections that they want to do, but here's the thing that they can't do. Without the seller's prior written consent, buyers shall neither make or cause to be made invasive or destructive buyer investigations. Okay? Except for minimally invasive testing required to prepare a pest control report. And it does not include any holes or drilling through stucco. So they added this part to really kind of define what can be done. For example, a pest inspection, they go into the property and they have their little stick and they poke holes in the eaves. That's what's considered a minimal intrusion. So it could create a little bit of a hole in there, but it's dry rotted wood that's damaged anyway. But you can't look through and drill holes in the stucco to look to see what's inside the stucco, to see if there's any drywood termites or anything like that. There was problems where the seller was saying, look, I let you do an inspection, but now I got holes in my house. That's considered invasive. So they added that line to kind of separate what can be done and what can't be done, which again, I think it's a good thing. The other thing they added in paragraph D, seller shall make the property available for buyer investigations. But this is the next line. Seller's not obligated to move any existing personal property. A lot of the times that's the garage. The garage is full. And the pest inspector is going to go into the garage and say, look, further inspection needed. I can't see the garage. In the past, it'd be a burden to the seller because the buyer would say, hey, get this stuff out of here. I need to do my inspections. Now this contract says seller's not required to move his own property out of the way. Which is, I think, a benefit to the seller. Let's see what else is new. Okay, this talks about the investigation, the reports, give the seller at no cost complete copies of all such reports obtained by the buyer. which shall survive the termination of the agreement. That's the same as the last contract. The reason why they added it on a previous update, they would say shall survive the termination of the agreement. People would argue, or attorneys would argue, that I don't have to abide by this contract because it called for the giving you the reports, giving the seller reports. The buyer says, hey, I'm out of it. I don't like the reports. I'm canceling the contract. Seller says, well, give me the reports. You're supposed to give me reports per the contract. And the buyer would say, well, the contract's dead. I canceled it. We canceled it. And now I'm not obligated to do anything that is per the contract. So they added that a while back, that regardless of whether the contract is canceled or not, the buyer is required to give the reports to the seller free of charge. One other thing that's added, which I love, because it always, every year will become a problem. And paragraph D, the delivery of investigation reports shall not include any appraisal. Okay, so we always talk about you need to give all reports, investigations that the buyer has done to the seller free of charge. This contract is saying that an appraisal is not a report or not an inspection. It is one person's opinion. That I've been saying this for a long time, but I really didn't have the backing of the purchase agreement behind me on that. Now it's clear cut. And the only time you have to give an appraisal from the buyer to the seller is if there's an appraisal contingency and the buyer is canceling the contract because of the appraisal contingency that it didn't appraise, then it's within the legal right for the seller to ask for that appraisal. But again, it's only because the buyer wants to back out because the home did not appraise. Seller wants to see proof of the appraisal on that, and that's a reasonable request. Okay. Let's see, title investing. The key thing in this title investing is that when you counsel your buyer, there are many different forms of ownership. And it's important that you tell the buyer that they're going to have to pick a type of ownership when you're dealing with more than one person, especially if it's a couple, whether they're married or not. There's different ways to take title. And what might be good for one couple or group may not be good for the other one. And it involves in two things, death and taxes. So we're not qualified as real estate agents to give that advice. Our advice should be strictly, hey, there's gonna be a decision you're gonna have to make prior to close of escrow. When you sign the lender documents and with the title documents, they're gonna be asking you how you're taking title. So be prepared. Here's the, you give them from your favorite escrow officer, you give them the different ways to take title, and there's explanations on that, but they should consult their attorney or their tax man to see which is the best way for them. Paragraph C is new, where the seller within 7 days, the escrow company might be asking them that they need information in order to clear title, that the seller now has 7 days to get that done. The other item that's new is paragraph E, which talks about if the property is at least $300,000, which for the most part, every property we sell is more than that. Then there's gonna be some reporting done if it's not using a loan. If it's cash, The title company is going to report the use of cash to the government. And what that's trying to do is trying to make sure that we're not trying to what is it called with money, launder money. So that's new, and that's in this contract now, and what's going to go. The other thing that's new is F. Buyer shall, after close of escrow, receive a recorded grant deed. Require grantee or any other conveyance document required to convey title, stock cooperative, a long-term lease, an assignment of stock certificate, or of the seller's leasehold's interest. So that's new. It's expanded a little bit. Not a big deal on that. So the important thing on title investing is to make sure that you coach your buyer, again, if more than one buyer and it's two buyers, that there's different ways to take title, and it could be significant impact if someone is to die in that regard. Any questions on that page? How am I doing? Am I going too slow for you guys? Is this,
I think it's
is
pretty
this-
good.
okay? All right, this is pretty dry stuff. And I'm pretty dry when it comes to that. So if anyone has a good joke or whatever and wants to stop for a minute, I'm all ears. Okay, let's go on to the next page. All right, this talks about the top of the page G, finishing up on title. Is going to get a title policy, and that's all boring stuff. Paragraph 14. Time periods, removal of contingencies. Again, when you have the 17 days or whatever you negotiate, after the 17 days, the buyer's either going to remove contingencies, cancel the contract, or negotiate. Now that could be for like requesting repairs, request repairs or request a credit, or come back and forth, and the seller can say no, goes back and forth until you got a bottom line of either you have an agreement or you don't have an agreement. So you either have a cancellation or you have an agreement. That's where it's gonna come down to. Let's see what else in here, and nothing else is really different in here. Oh, let's talk about, so say this contract is 17 days. Come 17 days, what happens if the buyer does not remove his contingency? What is the contract canceled?
I think they can, seller will send a request the action or something like that.
Yeah.
Request to perform.
Buyer
Yeah.
to perform.
Yeah,
Request to perform.
It's a notice to perform.
Yeah, notice to
So
perform.
day 17 comes and goes. You're in day 18. No one's done anything. Everyone's sleeping. Do we have a valid contract? Day 19 comes and goes. Do we have a valid contract?
I think you should have unless a contract is canceled, right? Until
Well, what
you
happens is
sign.
whatever the contingency periods are, if it comes and goes and no one does anything, you still have a valid contract. You have a valid contract until someone wakes up. And usually that's someone that wakes up is the seller or the seller's agent saying, hey, you haven't removed your contingency. Either put up or shut up. And that basically is that notice to perform. That notice to perform is 2 days. Once you get the notice to perform, to put up or shut up, either remove your contingency or cancel the contract. Every single item that the buyer or the seller is required to do, every single one, except for one item, that is an action item on the part of the buyer or seller. If the parties do not do it, you need a notice to perform in order to wake them up, to get them, put them on notice that they have to do it, or the agreement can be canceled. So every single item, what are the items? Let's start from the very beginning.
Physical contingency, appraisal contingency, loan contingency.
Those are three, but let's start with the basic one, usually within the first couple of days of the contract being accepted. What
Acceptance.
is the first? Well, you got the acceptance. What's the first action item that needs to usually happen?
EMD.
That's correct. If the buyer doesn't give the earnest money deposit, what happens? Within the contract calls for 3 days. What happens if the buyer doesn't do it?
Then I think if I were a listing agent, I think I will send again notice notice to perform.
Right.
And
Let me
it's
ask you a
sometimes
question then.
holiday times, I think can delay that count of calendar days, business days. Sometimes that can be argued
Well,
for EMD.
let me stop you right there so we don't confuse anybody. The deposit, the default on the deposit is 3 business days. Okay, so do I have the option as a seller, if the buyer after 4 days, after 4 business days doesn't put in the deposit, can I put the property back on the market?
I think you can.
Wrong answer.
Ooh,
You have to do first, May. I don't want to put you on the spot. Every action item requires a notice to perform.
okay.
After the notice to perform, then that party has a decision to make whether they want to cancel the escrow or not.
Okay.
So every single thing, so not just contingencies, but every action item requires a notice to perform if it's not being done. Now, I said about 2 minutes ago, every action item except one action item requires a notice to perform. What's the one action item that a notice to perform doesn't work?
Demand to close escrow.
There you go. Good one. Bonus points. So
What was that
every
mean?
action item,
A close of escrow, demand to close of escrow, that doesn't work with the notice to perform.
that's
Can you
right.
please repeat that part? Maybe
Yeah.
I didn't hear it.
All right, there's every action item required in a transaction is to get someone to do it, you first have to give a notice to perform. Every action item except the close of escrow. And that demand or that notice is called a demand to close escrow. That is totally separate from all the action items on a part of a buyer or seller. So if you make the mistake of giving a notice to perform to get someone to close escrow, you basically means nothing. And everything just keeps on going. You gotta give a demand to close escrow because it involves 2 separate issues. It's complete different wording for a demand to close escrow, and it's different timelines. Instead of 2 days, it gives 3 days. So make sure, because it happens all the time. There's confusion out there, and this is not the new contract versus old contract. This is the contract. That when someone's not closing escrow, you need to give a demand to close escrow. Don't forget that. If you give a notice to perform, that gives no weight and does not trigger anything. Okay? It's important, guys.
Question.
It can make the difference in a seller getting very angry at you by not doing the right thing.
I have a question. If everything is going well, we don't need to demand to close of escrow, right?
if everything is going well in the transaction, you don't need a notice to perform or a demand to close escrow.
Demand of demand of escrow. I will need. It's because of why? Why escrow can possibly be delaying?
Oh, let's talk about that. On a
can
part
of
of who? On
worm.
a part of the buyer or the seller?
Let's talk about as a seller.
Okay, well, first of all, I brought that up because a notice to perform and the demand to close escrow can be applied to, given to either the seller or the buyer. There's reasons that maybe the seller doesn't perform, he's not giving his seller disclosures. So that's a notice to perform there. Maybe closing escrow is that he decided he doesn't want to sell anymore. There's no contingencies on a part of the seller that he has the right to cancel the contract unless it's specifically built in this that's written in. So that would be if the seller says, I don't want to close escrow anymore. When it gets close to closing escrow, the buyer has to give a demand to close escrow to put the seller on the spot saying, hey, I want to still close. That would be a reason why the seller gets a demand to close escrow. The other thing could be that the seller's delaying the contract of close of escrow because maybe his new living area is not ready yet. And he doesn't want to close and the buyer wants to close. That would be a demand to close escrow. So there's a bunch of reasons on either side why a buyer or seller is not closing per the contract and delaying it. Or deciding not to do it.
My experience was about that was the weather condition last February. It was a severe storm. I think it was my close of escrow time, and title offices were couldn't perform, so we delayed a couple of days.
No, that could happen, but that wasn't a seller.
But that was
problem or a
mutual
buyer
respect, you know, that was extreme situations.
So off of this paragraph 14, what's the thing? If we need to change something, what do we use?
Addendums.
Addendum. So you keep in, we'll be talking in a couple minutes about time is of the essence. So you need to, if someone is not able to perform and it's agreed upon, you need to keep the time is of the essence correct, and you, with an addendum, change the date of when something's to be done. Okay, let's get back focused on this contract in paragraph 14. So we talked about the right to notice to perform. We talked about the demand to close escrow. The other thing that we want to talk about is that the change to the contract today versus last week is that there used to be a line item that you could change it from the notice to perform. It had the option of 2 days or blank. That blank is eliminated. So now it is just 2 days for the notice to perform. That blank is eliminated on the demand to close escrow. We used to say 3 days or blank. That is now, the blank is gone, and that's just 3 days. So 2 days for the notice to perform, and 3 days for the demand to close escrow. Okay. What happens when the buyer's going to cancel? And we're talking now paragraph D. Buyer cancels the contract, and it's not being disputed by the seller. The buyer's canceling the contract. The seller has to agree to cancel, and more importantly, that deposit gets returned to the buyer in a timely manner. If it does not get to the if the seller is playing a poor sport and wants to keep that deposit in escrow, And again, we're not fighting over the deposit. It's just that the seller is negligent in wanting to give that buyer the right to get his money back, even though he's entitled to it. That could land the seller with problems. 1057.3 is a civil code which the seller can get fined up to $1,000 by not signing the cancellation and returning the deposit back in a timely manner. So anyway, so again, the right to cancel if it's not disputed. If it is disputed and the seller and the buyer are fighting over legal issues, that deposit could stay with the escrow holder until it's resolved through either negotiations or through legal actions. And the legal actions can be mediation, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and then arbitration. But unless you have a meeting of the minds, the escrow company is not going to do anything and just raise their hand and say, look, let's come up with a mutual agreement and then we'll go from there. And let's see what else. The other thing is that we covered the notice to perform, the demand to close escrow, the effects of cancellation of the deposits, and the other issue that is in there that I briefly skipped over is that once a buyer removes his contingencies, we're saying that buyer, look, you remove your contingencies, you're a big boy. You have done your due diligence by removing your contingencies. You have did your investigations, you remove your contingencies. Don't come back later and say, I never looked at anything and it's not my fault that I'm not, that now I want to cancel. When you remove your contingencies, you are saying that you have executed your due diligence and covered all your concerns. So that's kind of where we are there. And that's in paragraph F in that. All right, we covered demand to close escrow, cancellation of deposits, 1057.3, that's the $1,000 fine that the seller can incur if they do not return the deposit with a non-disputable case. Okay. Let's talk about repairs. I'm trying to think of what I just went over that has that's new on this. Okay. Oh, you know what? Here's what's new. The effective cancellation of deposits, the note here, neither agents nor escrow holder are qualified to provide an opinion on whether either party has acted in good faith or which party is entitled to the deposits. So it's saying that we are not going to make judgment here, and it's between the buyer and the seller. And they should get attorneys involved. Repairs, everything's the same there. The repairs can be done by the seller. Seller's required to give the invoices to the buyer. Not everything even though the best made efforts are going to be to match, not everything may match. Tile may not match, carpeting may not match, different dye lots, anything like that. So that's everything is the same except for, where am I? Government permits. Let me see. No, everything seems the same on this one. Oh, this is different. Sellers may be performed at seller's expense by seller through others, provided that the work complies with the applicable law, including government permits, inspection, and approval requirements. So they expanded the repairs to add this verbiage in here, which I think protects the buyer a little bit better. So that's added on that. But the repairs can be done by the seller, and it's going to be performed in a good, skillful manner, and materials shall be quality, but they may not exactly match. Here's a big change. Paragraph 16, we talked about it yesterday. Buyer shall have the right to make a final verification of the property within the time frame specified. Now, remember, yesterday we talked about it. It used to be the old way was within 5 days. They got rid of the within. Now it's just 5 days. So that's a big change. That one word makes it a big change. Now, again, this talks about it's not a contingency of the sale, but solely to confirm. And the important thing, nothing's changed here. Buyers shall have the right to make a final verification of the property. Is it required? No. Is it the standard of practice that we want to do when we represent our buyers? Absolutely. So any questions on the walkthrough? Final verification.
So if there was any issues on the final verification of the condition, would you still have the right to, I mean, would you have to put in a notice to make any repairs
Yeah.
necessary?
Yeah, so let's go through the scenario within 5 days. Used to be. Now it's 5 days. So now you have 5 days. You do your walkthrough, you find out that there was a where there what let's say it's vacant now, where there was the big bedroom, king size bed, now has carpet stain that is red paint. And that's not, that's not the same condition as what it was when you walk through, when you first made the offer. So now you can't hold up escrow because it's not a contingency, but you talk to the listing agent and say, look, we want to get this rug or carpet repaired. And if it can't be done by close of escrow, we'd like to hold X amount of dollars in escrow so it can be done. So that's the type of thing that you do. Or the movers put a hole in the wall and you want that repaired because that's not the same condition as what the house was when you made the offer. So you have those 5 days to either get it repaired or maybe put some monetary security or deposit, keep it in escrow. Or the very worst that could happen is that the seller says, I'm not going to put any money in and I'm not going to do it. The last ditch effort you have is the buyer has is easily taken with small claims court. And I've done that on several occasions with clients over the years. So it's not, the walkthrough is not the ability for the seller, the buyer to cancel the contract, but it is the ability for you as the agent to work it out so that the buyer is hopefully protected. Okay?
Within the 5, did you say within the 5 days, the seller needs to make the repairs also within that
No, I
same
mean-
5 day?
I mean, that's the ideal scenario is I'd like to
Yeah.
get it fixed before close of escrow, but
Yeah,
that may or may not be possible.
yeah.
Well, if it's not possible, I would like to at least try to have some money left aside in escrow to make things work.
Okay.
Any questions? Guys, I need 1 second. My room here, I'm just dying of heat. Hold on 1 second. Chelsea, can you control the heat, please? The heat is boiling hot. Thank you. Okay, I didn't want you guys to see me pass out, so I needed to get something done. All right. Was there another question regarding walkthroughs, verification of property? Okay, let's move on then. Prorations of property taxes and other items. Same thing as before with added verbiage, which really clears some things up potentially for some people. So what's prorated on a transaction? Give me some examples. Here's a hint. What does this say?
Property taxes.
There you go. That's one of them. The other thing could be rent. That could be another example, but anything that's prorated means that the seller's responsible for the payments up until close of escrow, and then buyer's responsible for the payments after that. If we're dealing with rent, the rent goes to the seller up until close of escrow, and then the income goes to the buyer after close of escrow. They added some verbiage to deal with supplemental tax bills. And it talks about, especially when we've had some flips, right? So someone buys the property, fixes the property up, 4 months later turns around and sells the property, and there's a supplemental tax bill that's out there for the seller who purchased the property 3 months ago or 4 months ago. So this clears up the supplemental tax bill when the county can't act quick enough, that it'll be prorated again during the term of the seller's ownership. Okay. Everything else is the same, that the prorations take place, like I talked about. Brokers and agents. No change in this. Basically, the first thing that it says is that paragraph A, if there is compensation, and there is a buyer broker agreement, that compensation, that buyer broker agreement will now be part of this contract, and the buyer will be getting the compensation per the buyer broker agreement. Ties the two together. Scope of duty is kind of a CYA, where the agent, where we are telling the buyer and seller, we don't set the price, we don't guarantee the performance of construction workers, of also the inspectors, the vendors. We don't do anything more than a visual inspection. We're not going to go underneath the, we're not going to go on the roof. We're not going to go underneath the house. We are not responsible for the square footage of the home. I mean, it just, read that, it just goes on and on. You would think that with this paragraph, how would we ever get named in a lawsuit? But we do. Any questions? Okay. Joint escrow instructions. This is familiar, like the old contract. Basically, what it does is gives the ability of the escrow holder to do what they're hired to do, and be the independent person that is taking mutual instructions from both the buyer and the seller to do their job and get this from the start of acceptance to the close of escrow. And what are the mutual instructions that the escrow holder goes by? Where do you think this is?
The purchase agreement.
Purchase agreement. So anything outside of the purchase agreement, the escrow holder is not going to do unless there is a meeting of the minds between the seller and the buyer. So what is an addendum is now included in the purchase agreement. So any changes to the purchase agreement needs to be in writing, and the escrow officer is not going to do anything independently that one person wants and the other person doesn't want, without getting the buy-in of both people. If there's instructions from one person and not the other, what is the escrow holder gonna do?
Nothing.
Nothing. He's gonna, the escrow holder, he or she is gonna say, guys, I don't have mutual instructions. Let me know when you guys tell me what you want me to do. And a common one, well, we don't like it common, but one of the instructions that a buyer might say to the escrow holder is, I'm canceling the contract, give me my money. And unless the seller agrees that that money be released, that escrow holder is gonna say, my hands are tied, I'm not doing anything. Let me know when you guys decide what mutual instructions. Okay, paragraph 20. That's the same. Oh, you know what? Let me hold on one second. This is changed. I don't remember seeing this before. Agents are not a party to the escrow, except for brokers for the sole purpose of compensation. So it's the commission goes to the broker, not the individual agent, which you guys know. That's why the checks come to the office. And then you get your check there. That is new. The other thing that's new, paragraph E, that the escrow holder may require invoices for expenses under the agreement. And that's a requirement that within 3 days that the seller or buyer may have to give invoices. Okay. Let's go on. Selection of service providers. This is saying that we don't stand behind our referrals of the service providers that we recommend. So that's a kind of a CYA. Paragraph 21 talks about that the information in the MLS is gonna, the information of the sales price is gonna be posted on the MLS. It really helps our comps for future business. So this paragraph 21 is expanded from the last the last contract. The increase here of verbiage is buyer acknowledges that any pictures, videos, floor plans, images, or other information about the property that has been or will be inputted into the MLS or the portals at the instruction of the seller in compliance with the MLS rules will not be removed after close of escrow. They had to add that because so many people and buyers wanted or requested that the pictures be removed, and it can't be removed after close of escrow. That's against the MLS rules. So I'm not saying that it can't be done before close of escrow, but after close of escrow, it cannot be done. And now it's in the purchase agreement that the buyer and the seller agreed to. Paragraph 22 is the prevailing party. If there is a lawsuit and regarding attorney's fees, the prevailing party gets their attorney's fees paid for. Let's see what that. And the good news is, are we parties to the contract? Are agents and real estate brokers parties to this real estate contract? The answer is no. Therefore, this attorney's fees getting paid is not us. So when someone goes after us, whether it be the buyer or the seller, they have to pay their own attorney's fees in order to go after us. Anyway, if we didn't have this paragraph, or if we were parties to the contract, we would be seeing a lot more legal fees. We would be seeing a lot more claims against us. Paragraph 23, we talked about that yesterday, that's changed quite a bit. And what's new is the 17 days. And I'll give you some verbiage where what's been changed. Buyers right in the middle here. Prior to any assignment, buyer shall disclose to seller the name of the assignee and the amount of any monetary consideration between buyer and assignee. So it gets to be a problem. In the past, when there was an assignment, a flipper does not, well, no, I can't even say a flipper. An investor enters into a purchase agreement with the seller and then sells or assigns the contract to another party for compensation. And it's not disclosed till eventually it has to be disclosed at the closing as to what the money is going to be. And that's when the seller gets mad at everyone, saying, why should this guy get the money when I should have sold it to the end buyer and got this extra money? So now, this is now no surprise anymore. Within 17 days, the buyer's is going to disclose to the seller who is assigning it to and the money that he's going to be getting. So that's new.
That doesn't give the seller any right to cancel the contract, though, if he found out that the buyer was going to make the spread and the difference of the contract.
But after 17 days, he doesn't have to agree to it. And in the grid, it says that the assignment has to be done in 17 days, within 17 days. So after 17 days, the seller doesn't have to reasonably approve the assignment.
Gotcha.
But you're right, if it's done within the first 17 days, the seller should not unreasonably withhold the approval. But it still, I'm telling you, it still can get nasty. But after 17 days, the seller is really off the hook. Doesn't have to allow it. And the other thing in here, if buyer fails to provide the required information within the time frame, seller's withholding of consent shall be deemed reasonable. So if buyer does not, deliver the information, if buyer fails to provide the required information, it is now, this is all new verbiage. So it's a big difference from what we had in the past, with this now a limiting 17 days. Any questions on the assignment? Before 17 days, seller shall not unreasonably withhold. After 17 days, if the buyer didn't give the necessary information that they want, asking for an assignment, then the seller can withhold the consent.
So if the buyer bought it on and was planning on trying to flip it for a quick spread of the price, he has that 17-day window to name somebody without question. Otherwise, it's at the discretion of the seller whether to allow the assignment.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Now, the big thing comes in is the buyer in 17 days is, did he remove his contingencies or not? So, I mean, it gets a little more sticky for the buyer. Any other questions, Andy?
No, that answered it. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Okay, no discrimination allowed in paragraph 24. Paragraph 25 is the definitions, and again, the important definition in this is probably K, which is delivery. And the reason why I'm gonna let's go over it right now instead of when we get to it in the contract. Delivery of acceptance. When we enter into a contract, initially the buyer signs the offer and the seller accepts the offer, whether it be counter offers or not, going back and forth. But bottom line is, you have the both buyer and the seller agree to the contract. What needs to happen to make this a valid contract? You don't have a valid contract yet with both the buyer and the seller's signature. You need one more thing. What do we need?
Notification of the seller to the buyer.
Or the
In some
buyer to
way.
the seller. Instead of notification, we call it delivery.
Delivery.
So the delivery of acceptance, whether the seller to the buyer in a regular contract or in a counter offer, be reversed, buyer to the seller. But you need to have, just think about it, with the common sense of your buyer makes an offer, seller signs it, but doesn't give the contract back. How does the buyer know that they have a transaction? They don't until they know that the seller has signed the contract. And they know they have that when they have a delivery of acceptance. That constitutes a valid, fully executed contract. Both parties have signed an agreement, and it's conveyed to the other party that we have a deal. And the best way that they change that in this contract, we'll get to that the last page, is by definition of what delivery is in paragraph K. And delivery is when the appropriate email, when it goes to that, when it's emailed to that party, and that either the seller's agent or the buyer's agent. When it is emailed to the email address, that is the official email address, that is delivery. It was confusing before this, because if you emailed last week, if I emailed the signed contract and I had the listing and the buyer never opened up his email, is it delivered? Good question, right? We assumed that it was delivered once it was sent. This contract spells it out. So once it's emailed out to that email address that's provided on the last page, that is considered delivery. Not the opposing party's responsibility that the other party never opened up their email. It was proof of delivery is when it's sent to the other email. Okay, let's get into that and hold that thought. Actually, let's jump to it right now. This is what I'm talking about in this page on 16, the last page. Look in the box here. Agent signatures and designated electronic delivery address. Email. When it is sent to this email or this email, depending whether it's a counteroffer or regular purchase contract. That is the definition of when it is delivered. Okay? Any questions on that? All right, I'm going to go back. Okay. Everything else in here. I think this is in the old contract, but terms and conditions of the offer, sellers the right to continue to offer the property for sale and to accept any another offer at the time prior to notification of acceptance and to the market the property for backup offers after acceptance. I think that is new. But basically it's saying until there is delivery, the property is still on the market. So, or until the other party signs the contract, we're gonna keep on, either making other offers or taking other offers. Okay. Time is of the essence. I talked about that a minute ago. That is where you're keeping all the timelines intact. If there's going to be something that can't be met and you agree to extend the date, you need to do it in writing. It can't be verbal. In other words, if I have a loan contingency and I need a couple more days to keep time is of the essence, you need to have an addendum extending the contingency. The reason being is that once you break time is of the essence, it's hard to keep the timelines intact. In other words, if I'm a buyer and I don't get my earnest money deposit in on time, I don't get my additional deposit in on time, there's no time frames, the seller, it doesn't care about this and let me go, and I don't deposit in 3 days, I don't remove my contingencies in 17 days, and it's now 29 days before I remove my contingencies, but yet it's day 35 and I'm supposed to close escrow on day 35 and I don't. All of a sudden the seller now, since all the time of the essence has been broken, can't cancel. I mean, you can try to cancel the demand to close escrow on the date that I'm supposed to close, but a judge is going to say, Mr. Seller, you didn't care about anything in the timelines. I'm going to grant an extension on the buyer to close when he wants to, or to give him another 15 days because you did not keep time is of the essence. So that's why it's important that you keep time is of the essence to make sure that all the timelines can be enforced and are met. So if you can't meet the timelines, get it in writing for an extension, or make sure you fall within the timelines. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, this is a big paragraph. Not big, but paragraph 28, legally authorized signer. There's a form that we use called representative capacity agreement, that you use it when it's a corporation, you use it when it's a power of attorney, you use it in a trust. And basically this paragraph and this contract, the way it's written, you can eliminate the representative capacity. You don't need it. There's a built-in representative capacity now in our purchase agreement. It's still available for you to use it, but you don't need it now with this paragraph 28. The legally authorized signer represents that the entity for which that person is acting already exists and is a good standing to do business in California, and shall deliver to the other party and escrow holder within time frame evidence of authority to act on that capacity. So that's a big addition to not needing the representative capacity. Okay, let's bang out these last couple pages, and the first thing is if there's a dispute. Let's talk about liquidated damages first. And we talked about it yesterday, that 3%. That's why 3% is important as a deposit, because liquidated damages, if it's agreed upon, and both parties have to agree that you're either gonna have liquidated damages part of the contract or not have liquidated damages part of the contract by initialing the paragraph. Both parties either have to leave it blank or both parties have to sign it in order to have it, to have a mutual agreement. If you have one party wanting liquidated damages and the other party not wanting liquidated damages, you do not have a meeting of the minds. You don't have a contract. You might as well be off $100,000 on the purchase price. You don't have a valid contract. So let's talk about liquidated damages. This is saying that this puts a limit on the amount of damages the seller can collect from the buyer should the buyer default on the purchase agreement. And it is saying that it's either 3% of the purchase price or the deposit, whichever is less. That deposit, whether it be initial deposit or additional deposit with a DID form, shall be at risk if the seller can prove that he has damages. Does it say how much of damages? No, it just says that it has damages. And the way the law is, that damages could be $1. It's still damages. And if it is damages, that if everyone agreed to it, the buyer is at risk his total deposit. What's the benefit? Well, the benefit is that you know that it's limited to 3% or the deposit, whichever is less. If the buyer backs out and is breaching the contract and the seller has been damaged on $1 million sale, $100,000, if you don't have liquidated damages, the seller can sue the buyer for the entire loss, which is $100,000, a lot more than that 3% deposit of $30,000. So that's what liquid damages is. All parties have to agree to have it or not have it, and that's what it limits the amount the seller can go after the buyer for. I look at it as a benefit to the buyer. Now, other people may not look at it that way, but I look at it especially in a market like, in a market like this, when the overbidding could be $500,000 and the highest offer is 500,000 over the asking price, and the next offer might only be 200,000 over the asking price. That's a $300,000 potential loss on the part of the seller should the buyer not buy. So anyway, that's why if the buyer signs, we like to make sure that the seller signs so we have a valid contract. Any questions on the liquidated damages? Could be a big deal to the buyer or the seller when there is a breach of contract. All right, let's go on to mediation. If there is a dispute between the buyer and the seller agree by not doing anything, just by signing the contract, that they agree to sit down with a mediator and try to work it out on a resolution. The mediator has one job, and that is to negotiate an ending. Does it have to be fair? No. His job is to try to come to a mutual understanding. There are exclusions to mediation, and the biggest exclusion would be if it's less than $10,000 small claims court. You don't need to go through mediation. You go right to small claims court. The other thing is if there's fraud involved would be the other exclusion on that. But that is everyone's agreeing to. The next step, if mediation doesn't work, would be the ability to arbitrate. And this is just like liquidated damages. There's a paragraph that needs to be agreed upon by both parties. You either have arbitration or not have arbitration. The difference in this contract versus the other contract, they added that the arbitration shall be conducted through any arbitration provider or service mutually agreed upon by the parties, or naming the arbitrator. So it could be left blank, or regardless, unless someone really has a favorite arbitrator, it's gonna be mutually agreed upon. The difference between mediation and arbitration is it's the same thing applies. Small claims court is an exclusion to arbitration. The difference between arbitration, it's a little bit cheaper, a little bit faster. That's the plus. The downside is that it doesn't have to follow the court of law. In other words, there could be a whole bunch of court cases in the past that would side with one party, but the arbitrator's ruling can go to the other party. That's the downside of it. The other downside is that it's almost impossible to appeal an arbitrator's decision. That's the downside. Now, we don't care whether arbitration is part of the contract or not part of the contract. That's between the buyer and the seller. With that said, all my clients want arbitration, except the two types of clients that I had that did not want it. One was an old retired real estate broker that did not want arbitration because he lost on a court ruling that was not the same as past legal outcomes. So that was one. And then all my attorneys, clients don't want arbitration. So that, take it or leave it. I don't care whether arbitration's there or not. If you agree not to have arbitration in the purchase agreement, and then later after close of escrow, there's a dispute, buyer and seller could agree to arbitrate if they want to. Just by not agreeing to it during the contract, if both mutually want to have an arbitrator a year down the line, they can agree, and then they will have arbitration. Any questions on arbitration? Any questions on mediation? Any questions on liquidated damages? Okay, next page, buyer's offer. So after going through all these 15 pages, 14 pages, the buyer signs the contract. And the expiration of the offer is on the grid on page 3. And a couple things that are in bold in here is that the seller has no obligation to respond to any offer made. He could do that. We don't like that, but because we really want to, as a listing agent, we want to show that we presented the offer. So that's why we would like to have either a rejection from the seller, or that it was presented on a certain date by the to the seller, so that we as a listing agent or seller's agent can show the buyer's agent that we actually presented the offer, and the seller rejected it instead of responding to it. And then the entity buyers would be that talking about the representative capacity. So if you do have a someone from a corporation, you would check the entity buyer, and then you'd fill out the name and the entity that's there, whether it be a trust, whether it be a corporation, anything that you would need normally the representative capacity. Now you don't need that extra form because it's in paragraph 32, and paragraph in the subparagraph D and B on that. So anyway, so the buyer signs. If there's more than 2 buyers, you check this box and you get that Form ASA done, like we talked about yesterday in paragraph 1. So buyer signs, now acceptance time. Either the seller is going to accept, or the seller is gonna counter, or the seller is going to reject right here. And they change the verbiage from rejected or just simply offer not accepted. A little more of a kind of lowering any confrontation. So this takes care of acceptance. Seller's acceptance is subject to the attached counteroffer, or a backup offer addendum is also now included as a seller counteroffer. Now, the seller counteroffer can be both the multiple counteroffer or the seller counteroffer. Again, if the seller is an entity, you check this box. You don't need the representative capacity, and you fill this out here. Seller signs. If there's more than 2 sellers, Form ASA. The rejection would go here. And here's where this last page talks about the box where the agents are. Talks about the company, the agent, and more importantly now, email, so that we can get the delivery down. The one thing that's missing here that's in the old contract, we used to have a place where where there'd be a confirmation of acceptance. And that created problems in the past. People didn't know what that meant. Half the people would think that you needed that initial to make sure you had delivery, and that's not the case. And half the time it'd be blank. So they just got rid of it. And they put verbiage down to making it so delivery now is in that email. And the email address is here. Okay, so in this box, also, it talks about the company, the agent. Don't forget the license number of both the company and the agent. If there's 2 agents from the same company, they go here. If there's another agent from a different company, you would need the CAR form ABA, the additional broker acknowledgement. So if it's the same office, you would use the form AAA, or putting down the both agents down. But if it's a separate company, you would check this box. And it would show the form ABA, which is 2 different companies. Same thing for sellers. Sellers brokerage firm, company, agents, or if it's a different co-list with a different company, use that form ABA. And important, again, the email. Escrow holder signs, just like last contract. And then the presentation of offer would be either the agent or the seller. I like having the seller initial. So so there's no thoughts from the buyer's agent that I didn't present the offer, that I didn't do this above board. I'd like to get the seller just to initial that any of the offers were presented or not accepted. And you accept the one that you work with on that. A couple side notes before we get into questions and answers, or just questions and not knowing the answers. It is important for you to keep a copy of all the contracts that you receive as a listing agent or seller's agent, as well as all the contracts that you write up to your clients. Keep them. We need them. And we're gonna need them for in case there's a dispute, and especially for DRE. So as a seller's agent, have a file in command that are rejected offers in case you get multiple offers. And for a buyer, keep those contracts with you until you're finally in escrow on a property and have a rejected offers file in command. With that, let's open it up. Questions, comments? Are you feeling better after seeing this contract? And I'm sure most of you, this is not the first time that you've seen this. But let me ask you a question. Has anyone seen this in the last 2 days as part of their business? Anybody get an offer on a listing? Anybody write up an offer with the new contract? Any personal experience? Okay, just thought I'd ask. What questions do we have?
I see that at the bottom of every single page, a buyer needs to initial and seller needs to initial.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct. It's just showing that everyone is, everyone has
Yeah.
read and acknowledged the
Mhm.
page.
I have another question regarding entity buyers.
Okay,
Since more and more people have their homes in their trust,
yes.
they're alive, but the home is listed in the trust. Is that also considered entity buyer?
They would be, depending on the trust, they would be a individual signing as a trustee.
Okay. All right, thank you.
And you
Mike,
could put the name Joe Smith, comma, trustee.
Okay,
you were talking earlier about the notice. We were talking about notice to perform.
Yep.
And you were talking about the earnest money. Notice to perform for earnest money.
Okay,
It's a 3-day window. But is that 3-day to deliver and have in hand, or how does that work? Say you put it in the mail and the mail's taking 5 days, 6 days to deliver. What counts as the 3 days?
it needs to be deposited in 3 days. So,
Okay.
let me get the verbiage out of there. Within 3 business days after acceptance by wire transfer. That's the default. If it's gonna be a check, it needs to be, the box needs to be checked and needs to state that it's gonna be personal check, cashier's check, or whatever.
Okay, so there should be some wire instructions attached then?
Well, it doesn't have to be attached with the seller's agent doesn't have to attach wiring instructions until there's a valid contract. And then the point is that if I'm a seller's agent, I contact escrow, give them the contract and give them the contact information for the agent. And then the buyer's agent, and then the escrow officer is going to contact the buyer's agent and request the information of the buyers.
Okay,
And
so
then we'll get that going.
if the buyer, then it would be on the escrow agent to give the buyer the necessary information to make the wire transfer.
Within the 3 days, yes. But
Right, so if they never received it, are they still, how does that work?
well,
Or, I mean, they should.
they're still obligated per the contract to get the wire in within 3 days.
So they'd have
Business
to reach out to the escrow agent to find out the instructions to wire?
That they could, or the buyer's agent can facilitate the expediting the deposit, because everyone's got skin in the game.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
What else we got, guys? That's it? Is everyone confused? Everyone bored? Everyone awake?
Yeah,
All right, good. Look, I'll stay on. I'm sorry that I'm sorry that I'm 5 minutes over. I expected to be done at 3:15. So I'll stick around. If anyone has any general questions, regardless of whether it's on the RPA or anything about a transaction, anything about whatever, I'll be on. Everyone else, thank you for attending. Don't be a stranger to taking this class through CAR. You're just gonna have to get used to it. This contract, this is not going away. And please utilize this contract if you're a seller's agent. And you have a listing and an offer comes in today on the old form. I know there are agents that have made copies of the old contract and plan on using those contracts. Please don't just present them to the sellers and make a transaction happen. What I want you to do is first consult with your seller, explain to them that there's new and improved contract. The reason why it's changed is for improvement, and explain to them that there could be some buyer's agents out there that are not using the new contract for whatever reason, and that you want permission from your seller to go back to the agent that writes an offer on your listing on the old contract, to go back and tell them to rewrite it on the current new contract.
is that verbal?
It's not, you know what, an email would be a good idea, just so
Yeah.
that, hey, even if you talk to them, you send an email saying, hey, per conversation, I will instruct any buyer that comes in with the old contract to get them to rewrite it on the new and improved current contract.
Okay,
We as agents don't have that right to reject presenting an offer. Even though it's in the best interest of the seller to use a new contract, it's in the best interest for you to use the new contract too, because CAR will defend us if there is a case against the verbiage of the contract, but they'll only defend us with the new forms that we need to be using. So the old contract, if there's a dispute regarding verbiage, they're not going to defend us on that. So let's just use the new form. And that way, in case we have that 1 in a million chance that we're involved in litigation based on the verbiage, let's get Sierra on our side. Anything else, guys? Hey, is it raining over the hill yet?
oh. No, it's cloudy though.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a big storm tonight.
Oh, boy. Okay. Thank you so much, Mike. I always enjoy listening to your presentations.
No problem, Denise.
Okay,
Good.
bye.
You take care.
You too.
Glenda, are you seeing any new contracts come in with an execution date of yesterday or today on the old contract? Okay. All right. Hey, guys, if there's nothing else, I am going to call it a day.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, guys, you take care. Safe travels.
Thank you.